when we come to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and I even got a choose just talking about Sodom and Gomorrah because I'm so tired of talking about it because it's no longer part of who I am, right? But I guess I need to talk about it for one reason, that the atrocities that were committed in Sodom and Gomorrah speaks across genders, across diversity and all of that, right? So that's actually the point where I'm trying to take this workshop to. So, okay, let's look at the principles of engaging with the Quran as a theologian. You have to know the asbab al-nuzul, the reasons for revelation. You have to know where the story is located. You have to know the background of it. You have to know that this story is repeated a couple of times in different places in the Quran, at least over 9 chapters, 76 verses I've collected. And so how do we place these 76 verses together to actually make a story, right? And that story cannot also contradict history. It cannot contradict scientific facts, right? So you have to match up all these things. And obviously before the Quran was revealed, there were also other scriptures revealed. And so how does it correlate with what has been revealed before? So in order to do that, I'm going to take you just on a little bit of a journey to now give you a context. And this is just my context based on my research. You're welcome to disagree. But I felt that it was a context, at least it was compassionate and it was inclusive. Okay? So firstly, there is a notion that maybe this whole Sodom and Gomorrah thing is just a fantasy and, you know, people made it up some time ago, whatever. But the Quran tells us that it was actually existing. And they were existing along a highway of trade. It's today known as the Araba Highway. In fact, it is the only major highway that is still in existence today from that time. So there's a history around that it was a highway of trade, right? So point number one, there was trading happening between Sodom and Gomorrah and other cities, from Egypt right through Sodom and Gomorrah up to Syria, right? And so if you want to study that history, you can see there was pottery that was discovered. There was things that were brought into this place, and it couldn't have possibly grown there because of climatization. So this trade thing was very important, and it becomes important also when we engage with the Quran, right? So if you look at that white line there, that's actually the highway. If you go closer, you can actually see the highway there. And this is the one highway that has got the most traffic on a daily basis, right? So it's still a travel route. Now, if you look at the Dead Sea area, towards the foot of the Dead Sea, and this is also being confirmed now when the Ibla tablets was discovered in Syria in 1974, that the place where Sodom and Gomorrah was actually situated is correct. It's on that side and not the old biblical side, which was the opposite side. So probably that could have happened because that map was prior to the explosion and whatever happened there. And so part of the cities were also buried under the sea. So they are situated right next to the highway, right? And that's important. So what happens when cities are situated right next to a highway? The travelers that use that traveling route would have to make that as a stopover, right? So one of the things that these people of Sodom and Gomorrah did was they got tired of having to serve people and having to be hospitable to people, and they believed that, you know, their wealth was their own earnings and so on. So why do they have to share it with others, as the Bible tells us, and we'll see later. And so, incidentally, also at the same time, this is the time of Nabi Ibrahim, right? Because Nabi Ibrahim was the uncle of Nabi Lut, and the one command, you could say command of or teaching of Nabi Ibrahim was hospitality, right? And so we borrowed this whole hadith, that if you believe in Allah and the last day, then you honor your guests. So this comes from Nabi Ibrahim's time. And one can see why it was a command at that time, because Sodom and Gomorrah just didn't want to listen to that. Okay, so there we see the evidence that the Quran says وَإِنَّهَا لَبِسَبِيلٍ مُقِيمٍ. The city stands by a permanent road. So that permanent road is the Arawa Highway. And then we go into إِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الرِّجَالَ وَتَقْطَعُونَ السَّبِيلَ. And then it goes further saying that, mentioning a couple of the atrocities. I don't think we've dealt with this one yesterday, but it says, you approach men and you cut off the highway of trade. And you commit atrocities in the circles, right? Now, these atrocities in the circles also can go many ways if you interpret it, but if you look at the history, you can actually see that some of these buildings that were created, they were actually temples. And these aristocratic men used to sit in these temples making rules for the general public, right? And so the kind of rules that they made, like the Bible tells us, they were lying judges. They even had names like the awful liar and the deceiver, and so on. These were actually the names of the judges. So they were intending to create dissension. And often these rules that were created, also very importantly to note, was related to idolatry, and it was related to agriculture, right? So, for example, the smearing of the sperms on the statues of Ishtar was so that we give our fertilization properties to the gods, and the gods will make our lands fertile, right? So all of these needs to be taken in consideration when we deal with the story. Is there anything else I want to say there? Right, so we see there's a number of atrocities, and none of those atrocities mentions homosexuality. So there's the two maps I was talking about. That one locates, it's the old biblical one, locates the cities on this side, but the cities were actually on the other side. So you have Zor, Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboam, and so there were 5 cities in total. The Quran doesn't mention them by name. The Quran just refers to them as the cities on the plain. But we also see that the Madian people that the Quran is talking about are actually the other towns, and Allah says we destroyed them also because they were also committing atrocities. So there was a whole explosion that happened in that area around the Dead Sea. Also important to locate Nabi Ibrahim in the proper place. Before the Isla tablets was discovered in 1974, it was believed that Nabi Adam lived in that period, 2000 to 1500 BC. But now it's correctly located that he was actually a little bit earlier than that, almost close to 3000 BC. Why is that important to us? Because we discover that the orthodoxy will say that these are the first, and the Quran indeed says that, you are the first of mankind that actually engage into this practice, right? So now we assume that it's the practice of homosexuality, but then you go back to archaeological findings and research, and you actually discover that homosexuality and same-sex relationships were carved in caves and on pottery. So homosexuality existed even before Sodom and Gomorrah, right? So already point number 1 is then the Quran must be talking about something else than same-sex relationships. A couple of pictures I'm adding in here for you also to help you to create context. These are not formations of erosions, as geologists tells us. They were actually old buildings carved out of mountains, and they're not formations of erosion, for example. Some more, there you have carvings, they're carving palaces out of mountains. Apparently, according to the Quran, it's a tradition that they've, and a technology that they have learned from the art people before them. There's also more excavations that were discovered as the Dead Sea level was subsiding. They discovered that there were also actually some parts of the cities buried under the sea. So you look at all these excavations, and theologists tells us that the amount of excavations that happened at that time, and also the fact that the whole Dead Sea, and including Israel, is situated on a fault line. So it's a very volatile area for earthquakes, right? So much of excavations can also cause a problem. It can actually set off an earthquake. There's some more carvings. Some of these carvings, like you see at the bottom, they clearly ziggurats, temples of many gods that they had, and very similar to the civilization in Egypt and the religious beliefs of Egypt. So, what some of these archaeologists also have discovered, there were some cemeteries in that area. They were able to get some of the corpses, some bones and stuff that was left, and they did some research on these bone structures, and they found that these people actually ate quite well because of the structure of the bone. So they were not poor, they were actually quite wealthy, and they ate well. Pottery and some of the minerals, that's indicative of wealth. As I said earlier, they must have been also imported because not all of the things were manufactured in Sodom and Gomorrah. People were prosperous, they ate well because of the size of the corpses, and also there was a complex irrigation system which indicated that they actually knew a lot about agriculture, right? And so history also tells us about these hidden gardens that they had for themselves, and then there were the public gardens, right? So the hidden gardens were kind of more looked after because that was for the elite. I just threw that picture in there. Some people still believe that that's the wife of Lot who turned into a salt pillar, but nobody ever went and check if she's still inside.
Is it even solved?
Right. These formations that you see there, also geologists are telling us that they are not formations. It must have happened because of a huge explosion, and then the debris has set down and it formed these lines. And the Quran actually tells us about these lines as well. So there I put you a list of all the gods that they had. There was a god for everything, right? But the god that we want to talk about is the god of Ishtar. She was the goddess of love and war. And often when a war was won or some good harvest happened, then there's an orgy that's organized in the temple. And these orgies included temple prostitutions, and it also included men having sex with men. The idea was that if more men have sex with men, there's more sperm to produce, there's more to offer to the gods, and there's more fertilization for us. Things like figures similar to that of Egypt. Also important to note that his nephew come from a small village, Ur. They were both shepherds. They ventured out towards Egypt, as far as Egypt, looking for greener pastures. On their way back, Abram says, I'm going to go back because I have responsibilities there. And Lot said, I'm going to settle down in Sodom and Gomorrah. So that's how he became the outsider. Like you see the conversation between these elite men and Lot, constantly telling him, like, we're giving you this space, and now you come and speak for all and sundry. The Greek historian Herodotus, they wrote about Babylon, Mesopotamia. The worst Babylonian custom is that which compels every woman of the land once in her life to sit in the temple of love, temple of Ishtar, and have intercourse with some stranger. The men will pass and they make their choice. So temple prostitution was there. And then what these men had to do is they had to pay like a kind of a tax to the priest of the temple, and then they can just choose which woman to have sex with. The idea was these women have to offer up their virginity to Ishtar, and then they're ready to have sex. Right. Now, when we talk later about the daughters, which is the sole point for so many people, the daughters of Lot, we need to keep this also in the back of the mind, right? Why did Lot not want these daughters to be part of this practice of temple prostitution? Let's look at previous scriptures. The Bible tells us about Sodom and Gomorrah. They were arrogant, they were poor. They were not considering the poor and the needy. They were haughty. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, shake the dust off your feet when you leave the house or town. I tell you that the truth, it will be more bearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town. And it goes further talking about the inhospitality, which was the law of Abram that they didn't want to adhere to. Also, even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities above them, in like manner, which is the cities I spoke to you about, giving themselves over to fornication, strange flesh, and then again that can be interpreted in so many ways. Right. Going to the Jewish tradition, they give us something similar about a proud, because of the extent of their wealth, it made them very haughty, insolent to men and the divinity. So they came to a point where it was all about them. There was no reflection on the divine. They hated foreigners, they avoided any contact with others, so kind of isolating themselves, xenophobia. And the sin of Sodom is related to property, so there's also economic exploitation. Very further in Jewish, the Midrash also talks about what they used to do with these travelers. So a caravan would come in with merchandise, they would cut off the highway, usurp all the wealth of the caravans, rape the men, and then send them off naked in the desert. Now, sending them off naked in the desert was something that they practiced as almost as if a death sentence, right? Because if you go into the desert, you don't come out alive. And naked no. So, like I said, this comes out of my workshop. So at this point, normally what I do is I get the participants to just sit with that. The TOTs laugh because that's my favorite. Sit with that. To just kind of summarize for yourself, so what were the atrocities really? Because there was nothing about homosexuality in there. Or let's not even talk homosexuality. There was nothing about sexual orientation even in the story, right? And so as you can see, it cuts across gender, sexual orientation. It includes all of humanity. So maybe just quickly let's go around and just list what were some of the atrocities that you noticed in that piece of history or research.
In hospitality.
In hospitality, right? Maybe let's get somebody to just volunteer to write it down for us on that board. Anybody wants to be brave enough to go?
Well, Paul is right there. Makes sense.
Right, Paul.
That's why I'm moderating.
Right. In hospitality, what else?
Physical assault.
Physical assault. Right?
Obscene rituals.
Robbery.
Obscene rituals.
Okay.
Obscene rituals.
Pride.
Okay, hold that.
Hold your pride.
Paul is not that fast. Just repeat what you said.
Pride, yeah.
Right.
You missed a few though.
Yeah.
What was that one?
It's
Obscene.
It's about assault.
Pride.
Physical assault. Physical assault.
Xenophobia.
There was one there.
Obscene rituals.
Obscene rituals.
Robbery.
What did you say?
Robbery.
Farouk?
I said xenophobia.
Xenophobia and robbery. Exploitation.
Sexual assault.
Exploitation, including economic exploitation. Sexual assault.
There's also a sense
absolutely.
of elitism.
Elitism, and I want to relate that also to the power, right? Because a lot of the sexual stuff that happened was related to power, right? So again, already we're seeing that the Quran is telling us through the story that perhaps it's not a good idea to use sex for power, all of those were in relationships, right? Because it normally goes the wrong way.
Well, it was when idol worship through temple practices.
Idol worshipping through temple practices and the rules they made around that.
But even that doesn't seem to, because even the idol worship doesn't seem to be central in and of itself.
Absolutely.
It's all the other stuff that
Yeah,
goes
as if
along.
God wasn't minding about how people were seeing him, but more what they were doing
Yeah.
with that belief. Absolutely.
What about shirk?
Shirk, say more about that.
Idolatry, I mean.
Yeah.
Idolatry, that's what we, yeah.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
And
Great.
greed.
Greed, absolutely. So that speaks to economic exploitation. Right?
Consensual sexual
Unconsensual sexual acts, right? So coercive sex.
rape.
Coercive sex / rape.
And death penalty.
Death penalties. And the list goes on, right?
Yeah.
I just want to, like, directly there's a sense of narcissism.
Narcissism, absolutely. Narcissism. Right, to a point where they couldn't even recognize narcissism. Great. So, okay, I think it's going to come up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly unpack all these verses. I've left out the verses that just repeats the same thing, just for the sake of time. But in total, there's about 76 verses. So
You've got about 10 minutes. Okay?
absolutely. So we don't have all the time to go through all of them. But some of these slides has got those orange things in there, and that's really what I want to talk about. The verse that we sometimes struggle with: you approach men lustfully in preference of women, as if lusting after women is not a problem. So this I have a problem with this min duni, right? Translated as in preference of. But when you look at the Hans Wehr dictionary, which is probably the most updated Arabic to English dictionary, clearly says min duni is without, with the exclusion of women, right? So if you go back to that context that we were talking now about, we see that these men were actually having marriages, right? Because the Quran talks about azwajukum, and another sense it refers to these women as had these marriages, but these women, similar to the setup in 5th century Athens, were just there to bear legitimate children, but they were free to have sex with whoever they wanted to, and we can clearly see that they did a lot of temples and on the road and on the highways. So there was an exclusion of women from certain rights, right? Especially sexual rights.
Sounds like Saudi Arabia.
There we go.
Can I add something?
No wonder Allah tells us the story as reminders.
Temple rules that they keep making in the high river of Korea.
Was there a question?
No, it's just some addition because I've read already on this bill Minduni as when the trades are coming, they come with like men and women. Minduni, it's under. So they leave the woman and they rape the men as a sign of power in front of their women. So
Right.
So it's
Absolutely. And he comes from an Arabic context, so he knows what he's talking about. Right, let's look at some more verses. Right, we see the hopelessness. Oh my God, I've been trying so much with these people and I don't know how anymore to deal with this. This is a terrible day for me. And the terrible day was when these angels approached him as handsome young men, and he offered them the hospitality, brought them to the house, and his wife was not supportive according to the biblical story. She actually went next door to say, well, she said to her husband, you know, these people doesn't want us to entertain people and be hospitable towards them, and why are you doing this? And you know, we don't even have salt in the house, but you want to entertain people. And she says, I'm going to go next door to go get some salt, and apparently that's where the story leaked. There's some men that Lot is entertaining. So when she's being repeated in the Quran as, you know, this woman that lags behind, I want you to take the gender out of the equation. It was really just about betrayal. That's what I see. So she will have the same fate as those who committed all these atrocities. And so Lot says to them, oh people, you know, leave the angels. These are, because by then he knew they were angels. These are my guests, or oh people, these are my daughters. They are purer for you, so be conscious of God and disgrace me not in regards to my guests. Is there not anyone amongst you with integrity? Right. So we spoke about it yesterday. Why does he say to you can have my daughters, right? And some people were saying, well, how can a prophet do that, you know? But if you really study prophets, I think it's important that we have to accept that prophets were humans. The reason why they were humans and they made mistakes is because so that we can actually use them as examples, right? And I mean, I can ask the ulama here about all the things that constantly, even the Nabi Muhammad sallallahu abasa wa tawalla, you know, why you turn away from a blind man who comes to you for there's a mistake. So the Quran helped him to rectify that. Moses killed a man, right? But Allah forgave him for that. Nabi Yunus, he ran away from his responsibility, and that's how he landed up in the fish's belly, and Allah forgave him for that. So they made mistakes. So this could have possibly been a mistake in a time of hopelessness. And this is exactly where the angel steps in and says, okay, Lord, you've tried your best, you know, they won't touch you, just run away in the morning and we will save you and your family, right? And so, interestingly, why he says at this time, you can have my daughters, because there's a verse there, in this one on this side, they answered, you knew we have no right over your daughter. So the Arabic word is in the past tense, وَلَقَدْ عَلِمْتَ مَا لَنَا فِي بَنَاتِكَ مِنَ الْحَقِّ. You knew back then, when we came to you constantly to ask for your daughters for the temples, you said no. So now you're in a catch-22, now you want to give your daughters, right? So that was what was the hopelessness about. And that's where the angel steps in and says, hurry, by the morning we're going to destroy them and your followers, right? I'm not going to go into this whole ashfar thing, but that's also one thing I discovered. The Quran uses the word safala, but it owns a double meaning. It means to turn something upside down. And so the traditional interpretation was that the cities were turned upside down. But safala in this sense, for anybody who understands Arabic, is used not as a verb, but as a noun. So it must be referring to something. Back then, they didn't know that safala means asphalt. And in fact, one of the results of bitumen, and I never understand it completely, but bitumen was as important to Sodom and Gomorrah in trade as petrol and oil is to the Arabs today. So it was the very same asphalt that caused the explosion, right? So, and Allah says, if you go further, Allah says that the very same thing that made you aliyah, we made it for you safila, right? Safila, asfal. So that's the double meanings that comes out from there. So clearly that explains to us that there was no brimstone that came from heaven. That rosy picture we can take out of our heads. There was actually something real that happened there in terms of explosions. Okay, so there's where Allah says, and then we took all this debris, because asphalt, when it burns at a particular temperature, and that's what scientists can also prove today, that there was a particular temperature that causes this asphalt to turn into sulfur balls, and that was the sulfur balls that fell on top of them. And when they dissected these, some of these pieces that they found, they were actually sulfur balls in there, with the highest content of sodium, I think, and it fell on top of each other, layer upon layer. So there's some of the sulfur ball pictures. And apparently there's a lot that they got out of a sulfur ball, putting it under a microscope. It could even tell them the climatization of the time. And so the Quran actually reminds us, and if it comes up there, you can have a look at it, that it talks about the mutawassimin. So in the story, there are messages for the mutawassimin. Now, who are mutawassimin? A mutawassim is a researcher, right? And so the Quran says, you know, when you go back at some particular time, you'll get the full picture of what the story was about. Let's see if we can skip this. Okay. Let me see it there. Hurry with your family. We're going to destroy you. Right. And also these two words over there, fadaha and khaziyah, in Arabic it both refers to a humiliation, but fadaha clearly talks about a compromise. And also it's related to, if you look in the Hansberg dictionary, fadaha clearly is a violation, but a violation of the nature of rape and wishing. So another indication that this was not consensual sex, this was actually rape. Another also point out, which is important to know about these corpses, is that they also found a high rate of syphilis among them. Also both had syphilis. And one of the is that syphilis, you can have syphilis and not even know that you have it, and 15 to 20 years later, you see the ramifications of that, and often it comes to like madness, right? Yes. So, and so the Quran says, and they were wandering to and fro like mad people, right? We'll see the verse also there. So was that perhaps talking about, so they brought themselves to such a state where they were not even thinking clearly anymore as a nation. So it was almost inevitable that they were going to be the source of their own destruction. Right, there's the verse. So by your life, O Prophet, in their intoxication, they merely wander about. The other word there is, okay, that's about the destruction. I'm going to skip that one. Is the fault line that the Quran is talking about.
Do you want to just, you have another 10 minutes, do you want to continue and pick up any Q's and A's after, in the after session?
I think so, yeah. I think so, because I think that...
Yeah, I think it's important you
Right,
cover this, so.
أَتَأْتُونَ الذُّكْرَانَ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ. Right? I think that's also very interesting. The Quran is not talking about, the rijal that they were approaching. ذُكْرَانَ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ is that, if a man identifies as a dhakar, he often doesn't want to be penetrated. And so this was the discussion, is that yes, men who sees penetration as humiliation, why would you do that? Right? So that's what I got out of the use of that word, the Quran. This is again about saving them. There's a repeat of that approach with the exclusion of the women. And this is repeat of that verse again about the different atrocities. Okay. So we see also there was a hurricane that happened at the same time. We sent against them a hurricane of showers. So there's an earthquake that must have happened there. There's the leaking out of gases from the earth. And they didn't have electricity at that time, so they had fires at night to warm them up. And when these gas elevations, that also caused an explosion. And then you get this hurricane that just throws everything around. Another word I find interesting is وَلَقَدْ رَاوَضُوا عَنْ ضَيْفِهِ. Again, it was demanding, Muhammad Asad says it's demanding to give up his guest, but rawadu is really about attempting to seduce. So again, there's no consensual consent in that thing. And so early in the morning they were destroyed, and Allah says, so face my punishment for what you have done. And indeed the Quran is easy to remember. So is there anyone that will give admonition? So I guess it's easy if we just have a context against which we can speak and relate the Quran to, then it's easy to understand it. That's it.
Time for one question or?
Yeah.
My question was, as Lot wasn't from that, from Sodom and Gomorrah, why he wasn't treated as a foreigner and he was just welcome?
Maybe he wasn't sexy enough. And also, maybe there was a certain amount of respect for him as a prophet, but not really wanting to recognize his teachings. I'm not quite clear. There could be many other reasons.
I didn't understand the question. I'm sorry.
Why was Lot never raped?
Because
He was also a man.
with his people. At the beginning, he came with his people, and large population actually.
Right.
Then they became part of community, but he never he rejected. He became like them.
Okay.
Don't use the, I know you said it as a joke, but then that negates that sexual violence is actually violence.
Right.
Right, and I know you said it as a joke.
Absolutely.
Right. But yeah, I think this is what I've heard too, that he actually came with a group of people.
Yeah.
And I also think that Abraham was also known in the region. And so maybe
Yes.
there was a notion of that these people have this particular
Yeah.
pedigree. So that's what sort of
Right.
protected them.
Abraham was known as the patriarch.
Yeah.
So there was a respect that goes with that title. I mean, apparently he lived quite a couple 100 years, right? So.
This from what I remember from the Bible tradition, because they were sort of wandering around the desert. They went to Egypt and they're coming back, but there was a whole load of them. It's like some of these peoples in Africa where you have, in a few places you still have whole tribes and they wander around with their herds of animals. So of course there was some tensions, but there was even some conflict at the beginning. But then they come to a truce, they come to an agreement, and that's why it didn't happen. It wasn't just like a few people with a caravan. It was a whole community, and they come to an agreement to keep the peace. And they probably thought, if we attack Lot, then it's like Abraham and all the others are going to come and get us. It's like they knew they had a certain number of people there, that they were a whole society, and they were a serious threat if they attacked them.
May I ask a point of reference, and Khalil, if you mind commenting on it. I read some references, Jewish references, that prior there was a war. How did Abraham know about these people? And he was a military leader, and he worked, and he was part of saving some kings in that area. So I think a lot of people don't know about that earlier history of how was Abraham there. And maybe if you could elaborate just a moment, essential to.
To be honest, I'm blanking right now, but I do know he was a military leader in the tradition. And all you say is coming up with references, I'm blanking.
That's what I'm thinking of as well. It wasn't, you don't really get this in the Islamic tradition. It's like we see them as prophets. The Jews saw them as prophets, but we've got to think, the people of Sodom and Gomorrah didn't see them as prophets. They were leaders of the community, this other community, that a portion of which had come to stay with them, and they'd made an agreement with them. They had a social contract there. But, that didn't extend to Lot's guests. And then obviously this previous incident, happened a long time beforehand. That agreement happened. And then over time, it looks like from your research, they got steadily and steadily more upset with all these people that were traveling through and the hospitality that was being shown to them. So, these tensions could have come much later, many years later, than when they actually settled there. And, just like we see today, fluctuating situations where groups of refugees come from one country to another country, sometimes accepted, sometimes not, because it depends on the host community.
So that social contract could actually be something that can be referenced to the daughters, right?
Right.
You didn't give up your daughters, maybe
Absolutely.
that was part of the contract, that they're not given up to the prostitution. So this is again, all
That
sort
makes a
of
lot of sense.
interlocking sort of narratives, right?
And also one thing I know is that Abraham asked the angels when they came to visit him, can't you find some good people there? You see, because he was,
Yes.
so that's also a process that there were people that he knew of
Right.
that were there.
Time's up.
Great. Thank you for listening.
Can I suggest that when there's another session at 10 after 2, also on affirming, and we're going to have a few people study and
So what we plan to do with that session is we have a queer imam and we have a straight imam. Excuse the labels. And we also have some narratives from queer Muslims that are actually studying the religion of Islam, and also what are their experiences and the struggles that they have with the text. So we'll have that in the next session after lunch. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you.